Good evening, traveller. Lay your head upon your goose feather pillow, unless of course you're a peasant, in which case, enjoy your bundle of straw and despair. Tonight I shall tell you a tale of blisters, bishops, and blame. Our story begins in a time of chivalry, castles, and really questionable hygiene. A time when the air was thick with incense, and the stench of someone who hadn't bathed since Pentecost. A time we lovingly refer to as the Middle Ages. Oh yes, before I begin this journey, comment where you are watching from, and also what time it is for you. Don't forget to subscribe. Yes, that special chapter of history, wedged between the fall of Rome and the rise of coffee. A time when people believed that disease came from bad smells, bread could cure sadness, and, most importantly, when women were blamed for literally everything. You see, dear listener, if a cow stopped producing milk, woman's fault. If it rained too much, woman's fault. If it didn't rain enough, still woman's fault. If your crops failed, your beer soured, or your nose fell off from syphilis, guess who was responsible? Spoiler. It wasn't the guy who hadn't washed his hands since the Crusades. Let us now wander down a cobbled lane of law, sarcasm in hand, and visit the medieval mind. A place where logic goes to die and misogyny thrives like mould on a monk's cheese. Before we even get to the medieval era, the groundwork had already been laid, right there in the Garden of Eden. According to certain interpretations of a certain holy book, Eve, with her sinful curiosity and tragic love of fruit, doomed all of humanity with a single bite. And just like that, women got a reputation. The kind of reputation that made church fathers sit around with their quills and think, ah yes, pain in childbirth and eternal damnation, definitely her fault. By the time medieval Europe was fully underway, the notion that women were morally weak, easily tempted, and spiritually inferior was basically doctrine. Written down, published, mass-produced by monks who had plenty of time and no access to Netflix. Because of Eve, any time a woman had thoughts or ideas, or, God forbid, an education, it was seen as suspicious. What business did she have knowing things? Knowledge was dangerous. Unless, of course, it was about baking or dying in childbirth. Ah, the church. Keeper of souls, supplier of guilt, and the original influencer before TikTok. The clergy, particularly the more enthusiastic ones, had a certain fondness for explaining everything through the lens of divine punishment. Plague? God's wrath. War? God's wrath. Women talking too much? You guessed it. God's wrath. Enter the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches, a book written by two men who clearly needed therapy. It outlined in painstaking detail how to identify and punish witches, who, surprise, were usually women. Why? Because women were more impressionable, more carnal, and my personal favourite, more likely to weep. So emotional, so evil. This book became the go-to manual for witch hunters across Europe. Think of it as the IKEA guide for assembling misogyny. Step 1. Find a woman. Step 2. Accuse her of causing a thunderstorm. Step 3. Set her on fire. Cozy. Now you may ask, what kind of woman was most likely to be accused of witchcraft? An excellent question, dear listener. Let's see. Was she a healer? A midwife? A widow with a few goats and no husband to hide behind? Ding ding ding, you win the prize. It's a mouldy apple and a suspicious glance from the village priest. Healers, especially women who knew things about herbs, were often the target. You know, those suspicious types who helped sick people and delivered babies, clearly up to no good. And widows, oh, don't get me started. A woman without a man was basically just a free agent of chaos. Who was controlling her? Who was watching her? Who was keeping her from cursing your crops with her angry uterus? You see, having autonomy was terrifying. It's the medieval equivalent of logging on to Facebook and writing, "I think women deserve rights." Instant outrage. Burn her. The Black Death arrived in Europe like an uninvited guest and made itself very, very comfortable. People were dying in droves, rats were thriving, and science was still in a long-term relationship with astrology. Naturally, people asked, why is this happening? And the answer, dear listener, was women. They said women had made pacts with the devil. They said women were boiling frogs and whispering curses into the wind. They said women were seducing priests, because clearly the priest had no control over themselves. Forget germs. Forget fleas. The real culprit? Agnes, the weird woman who sold nettle tea and didn't smile enough. Let us not forget the horrors of fashion. Women in pointy shoes, clearly witches. Women in red, devils in disguise. Women with opinions, dangerous seductresses, obviously. If a woman was too beautiful, she was a temptress leading men astray. If she was too plain, she was hiding something. If she was married and her husband cheated, she was clearly at fault for not being submissive enough. If she wasn't married, she was a threat to every man's virtue. It was a lose, 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 lose situation. You've heard of hysteria, yes? The ancient, beloved diagnosis that literally comes from the word uterus. Men couldn't possibly behave irrationally, so it had to be women and their wandering wombs. If a woman was emotional, she was hysterical. If she was calm, she was cold. If she screamed during childbirth, she lacked faith. If she died during childbirth, well, maybe she sinned. Or maybe she just couldn't keep it together. So weak, so blameworthy. If a pig fell into a well, if a bishop tripped on his robe, if someone stubbed their toe on a cursed stone, it was probably a woman's fault. Or so they believed. Because blaming women? That was the medieval version of turning it off and back on again. A quick fix for every problem. A scapegoat in a corset. Let us press on, ever deeper into this charming abyss, where superstition reigned, rats were roommates, and a woman's greatest crime was being inconvenient to explain. In the ideal medieval society, a woman had precisely 3 career paths: virgin, wife, or witch. Be a virgin, you're a holy vessel, but too attractive a virgin, you're a temptation. Be a wife, you're property, but with the chores. Disobey your husband? Straight to the heretic starter pack. And if you aged out of the virgin category, and your husband inconveniently died, or disappeared mysteriously during a hunting trip, whoops, then congratulations, you are now a witch. You see, virginity was currency, and like most medieval economies, it was deeply flawed and completely unfair. Once a woman lost it, whether through marriage, misfortune, or, being attacked by a nobleman named Sir Gregory the Lecherous, she was now spiritually downgraded. And if she was older and childless, oh dear, why hadn't God blessed her womb with a screaming heir? Clearly she must have committed a crime, or used herbs. Same thing. You see, virginity was currency, and like most medieval economies, it was deeply flawed and completely unfair. Once a woman lost it, whether through marriage, misfortune, or, being attacked by a nobleman named Sir Gregory the Lecherous, she was now spiritually downgraded. And if she was older and childless, oh dear, why hadn't God blessed her womb with a screaming heir? Clearly she must have committed a crime, or used herbs. Same thing. Let's pause here to appreciate the true star of this story, the medieval man. Imagine, if you will, a nobleman, Sir Edmund of Never Wrong, who trips over his own tunic. He does not blame the tunic. Oh no, he blames his wife, or the kitchen maid, or ideally a woman who is not present and thus cannot defend herself. A peasant drinks too much mead, falls into a ditch and catches the plague. Must be the local widow who cursed him with her singlehood. A priest breaks his vow of chastity. Well, how was he supposed to resist the seductive ankle of that sinful milkmaid? The system worked beautifully, as long as you were not a woman. Let's talk trials. Not the legal kind that implies fairness and evidence. No. These were the she floats. She's a witch. She sinks. She's innocent but dead kind of trials. Water trials. Fire trials. Let's see if she cries when we stab her with a knitting needle on trials. These charming customs were based on the firm belief that truth could be squeezed out of someone like lemon juice. Just press hard enough, and the truth will scream its way out. And if she didn't confess, torture her again. If she did confess, burn her. If she took it all calmly, must be the devil giving her strength. It was a foolproof system, designed by, guess who? Men who truly thought they were doing God's paperwork. Medieval laws were, how shall I put it, inspired by poetry and livestock. There were laws against women wearing certain fabrics. Laws about how loudly a woman could grieve at a funeral. Laws about how many loaves of bread a woman could bake before being accused of a witchcraft. That last one may have been unofficial, but let's not pretend it didn't happen. And then there were the law-driven beliefs that a woman's hair could seduce angels, that menstrual blood poisoned crops, that women could talk to animals, but not in a Disney way, in a very suspicious, whispering to a goat kind of way. They believed that cats were witches' familiars. So naturally, when people started killing cats, the rat population surged, and so did the plague. But don't worry, they still blamed women. Let's revisit our friend, the village herbalist. She knows the woods. She knows which leaf helps with fevers, and which mushroom makes you hallucinate, like you're being chased by St. Cuthbert's ghost. But because she's a woman, her knowledge is feared. Her remedies are labelled as dark arts, and her refusal to flirt with the local blacksmith is seen as deeply suspicious behaviour. Eventually someone's cow dies. A child catches a fever. The herbalist is blamed. Her tools are burned. Her cat disappears. And she's asked kindly to die in a fire. It's the same logic that makes you blame your toaster for burning the toast instead of admitting you walked away to gossip with your neighbour, Edith. Medieval Europe had a complicated relationship with sex. And by complicated, I mean absolutely unhinged. Women were taught to fear their own bodies, while simultaneously being held responsible for every man's uncontrollable urges. A nun caught with a lover, temptress. A woman forced into sin, still her fault. A man sleeps with 10 women. A strong, virile hero. A woman has thoughts about a man. A succubus. Let me put it this way. In medieval sermons, the devil had horns, hooves, and apparently a girlfriend. And the best way to control women was to shame them. Shame them for existing. For aging. For not aging fast enough. For bleeding. For not bleeding. For talking. For silence. For being there. And so we come full circle. From Eve to the plague. From witches to widows. The pattern remains. Women were the easiest explanation for everything difficult, tragic, or embarrassing. The weather? Women. The war? Women. Your crops failing because you planted them upside down? Definitely women. And why? Because it's much easier to blame a woman than to admit you don't understand the world. Much easier to point a finger than to learn. Easier to fear than to question. And most importantly, it kept the power in the same hands it had always been in. Male hands. Calloused, unwashed, and absolutely convinced they were doing everything right. Dear listener, as your eyes grow heavier and your breathing slows, remember this. The women of the Middle Ages were healers, scholars, workers, mothers, warriors, lovers, and survivors. They were blamed, yes, but they endured. Silenced, but never truly quiet. Written out of the histories, but etched into the bones of every story. And now, you know a few of those stories. So sleep well tonight. Know that you are not cursed by a neighbour's herbal tea. You're simply tired from learning the absurd, tragic, and hilariously misguided reasons why women, for centuries, were blamed for everything. Close your eyes. Let the fire crackle. Let the ghost of poorly educated monks mutter in the wind. Women were expected to be silent, obedient, and invisible. Speaking out or showing intelligence was a surefire way to be labelled a witch. And we all know what happened to witches, don't we? A lovely dip in the local pond, courtesy of the ducking stool, or perhaps a cosy bonfire at the stake. But fear not, for not all was bleak. Some women found ways to navigate this treacherous world. They became midwives, healers, and even writers. Though their contributions were often dismissed or claimed by men, their resilience shone through. Let's imagine a village, quaint, charming, plagued by famine naturally. The harvest failed again, and the people were starving. But was the problem poor agricultural planning, soil depletion, perhaps a lack of crop rotation? Silly you. Of course not. The real culprit was Bridget, the red-headed widow who lived near the woods and knew a bit too much about herbs. Because obviously the barley died because she looked funny at the wheat. You see, dear listener, knowledge was dangerous, especially in the hands of a woman. If a woman knew how to treat a fever with willow bark, she was a witch. If she could help a woman give birth without screaming in Latin, definitely a witch. If she had a cat, oh darling, witch squared. And don't even think about menstruation. That monthly occurrence, so mysterious, so bloody, surely was a sign of Satan's curse. Never mind that it was a biological function. Oh no. If your cow stopped producing milk, it was because Margaret next door was on a period. This was the golden era of scapegoating, a time when logic was optional and hysteria was fashionable. And women, they were the accessories to every scandal, misfortune, and stubbed toe in Christendom. And if you're thinking, but surely some noble men stood up for them, oh sweet summer child, they did, right after checking if it would hurt their standing with the church and ensuring no one would suspect them of witchlust. Witchlust was a real thing, by the way. Sounds like a perfume. Witchlust by patriarchy. So, Bridget was dragged to the square, questioned with the same amount of scientific rigour used to decide what colour robe a bishop should wear. And when she failed the ducking test, which involved being tied up and thrown in a river, they declared her guilty. Because, you know, drowning meant innocence, floating meant guilt, and survival meant a second trial. Delightful. If a man couldn't resist his servant girl, he confessed and blamed her bewitching wiles. If a nun dared to question church doctrine, clearly the devil whispered to her through her hair. And if a woman said she had visions of angels, that smelled a lot like Satan with a harp. And let us not forget the theologians, learned men with massive robes and even bigger opinions. There was one, a true delight named Thomas Aquinas, who declared women were defective males. Isn't that sweet? Like calling a rose a broken thorn bush? Oh, but it wasn't all doom and gloom. Sometimes the church let women live, as long as they were obedient, silent, celibate, and willing to scrub floors for the glory of God. Sounds fair, right? And let's be honest, if your main theological argument is, she made me do it, perhaps your Holy Spirit is just a bit too fragile. Ah, yes, let's begin with the coveted role of wife. Oh yes, every girl's dream. A wedding arranged before she'd finished losing her baby teeth, a husband twice her age, if she was lucky, and a lifetime supply of childbirth and chores. He promised her the world, by which he meant a goat, a small patch of dirt, and the right to never speak unless spoken to. So dreamy. In marriage, a woman's legal identity disappeared. She was now one with her husband, literally. Her land, his, her voice, also his, her body, property of Sir Gruffalo III. And should she dare say no to his nightly visits? Why, that wasn't assault, my dear, that was marriage. Now, if she was lucky, or rather, if her husband died of dysentery, swordplay, or sheer boredom, she earned the prestigious title of widow. Oh, but don't think that made her powerful. Heavens no. A widow was now a suspicious woman, independent, possibly dangerous, probably into potions, might be a witch, should definitely be watched, especially if she had opinions, or books, or, God forbid, a working brain. And then, of course, there was the ever-present role of womb. Because in medieval times, a woman wasn't quite human unless she could produce heirs, preferably male ones. Girls? Meh. Maybe the next one would be useful. Hooray! You've birthed your 8th child and only 3 died. The village is thrilled. Have a crust of bread and back to work. Infertile. Must be cursed? Too fertile? Suspiciously lusty? Died in childbirth? Noble sacrifice. Survived it? We'll get ready to do it again next spring. Women's health was treated like a fun medieval riddle. Doctors, who were always men, believed the uterus wandered around the body causing mischief. Oh yes, the old wandering womb theory. Completely logical. Totally not made up during a wine-fueled monastery night. Symptoms included headaches, sadness, and, gasp, independent thought. The treatment? Marriage, obviously. Once upon a medieval morning, a woman woke up, stretched her arms and hoped, just hoped, today would not be the day she got accused of sorcery, heresy, or making a pie that didn't rise properly. But alas, sometimes the oven refused to bake evenly, and the cows miscarried, and the men caught colds. So someone had to be tried for it. And by someone, I mean a woman. Obviously. It was never Gregory with the mouldy cheese business. So let us journey into the sacred tradition of trial by ordeal. A fun little activity that proved a woman's innocence by trying to kill her. Fun for the whole village? There was the ordeal of water, where a woman was tossed into a river. Sink? Innocent and tragically drowned. Float? Guilty and ready for execution. Either way, congratulations, you're getting wet. Then came the ordeal of fire. Touch this red-hot iron, walk a few paces, and we'll bandage your hands. If your wounds heal within 3 days, why, you're clearly blessed by God. If not, whoops, guess you've been hexing the mayor's sheep again. And let us not forget that crowd favourite, public confession. Encouraged by friendly persuasion, like starvation, isolation, or being gently introduced to a torture rack. Because who wouldn't tell the truth after having their joints realigned medieval style? It wasn't torture, mind you. Number the church didn't believe in torture. They called it enhanced interrogation. You know, the holy kind. But what's most magical is how many women confessed to crimes they never committed. Isn't it curious? Almost like physical agony and fear of burning at the stake weren't conducive to truth-telling. How odd. Once accused, the village often gathered to watch. Men with pitchforks, women with side eyes, children with bread. Nothing says family bonding like watching Agnes the herbalist get judged by a man who can't spell heretic. And if she cried, she was hysterical. If she remained silent, she was cunning. If she spoke with poise, she was dangerous. Because the one thing more terrifying than a woman screaming in fear was a woman speaking with confidence. If a woman felt a bit faint, had a cough, or simply dared to sigh too deeply, she was immediately diagnosed with being a woman. Yes, medicine in the Middle Ages was less science and more guessing with confidence. And women's health? Oh, it was a delightful stew of superstition, bad Latin, and absolute nonsense. Let's meet the top 3 diagnoses for women. 1. Hysteria, the all-purpose label for any emotion that made men uncomfortable. 2. Melancholia, sadness, particularly if your husband was a bore or the soup was under-seasoned. 3rd, possession, because what else could explain a headache or ambition? The word hysteria comes from hystera, meaning uterus, because obviously the womb had nothing better to do than wander around the body wreaking havoc. Sneezing too hard? Wandering womb? Reading too much? Wandering womb? Saying, I don't want to marry that old guy with 3 teeth? Clearly, your uterus was headed for your brain. And what was the treatment for this terrifying organ on the loose? Ah, perfume. Not for you, darling. For your nether regions. Physicians would wave sweet-smelling herbs near the legs and stinkier things near the nose to lure the uterus back to its rightful place. Like coaxing a kitten out from under the couch. Did it work? Number, did they keep doing it? Absolutely. Of course, if that didn't work, there were always leeches. Nothing says healing, like letting a slimy worm suck on your ankle because you have cramps. Or maybe your uterus was too cold. Time for hot compresses and prayers. Too hot. Cold baths and more prayers. Too prayerful. Witch. Midwives. Those wise, capable women who actually knew something were often shunned or accused of sorcery, while male doctors who killed half their patients with mercury were praised as pioneers. Men could remove limbs and call it miracle healing, but if a woman used lavender to help with a headache, suspicious. Probably got it from Satan's apothecary. And let us never forget the church's contribution. Sickness is a punishment for sin. Who sinned? The woman. Who's sick? The woman. Who gets punished? Yes, you've guessed it, woman. Because clearly menstruation, childbirth and menopause weren't enough. Now she must also repent for having a fever. Ah, the fun part, women who read, the greatest threat since dragons. Once upon a scholarly nightmare, a woman picked up a book. No, not to decorate a shelf, not to fan herself while waiting for the plague to pass. She picked it up to read. And just like that, chaos. Society trembled. Monasteries wept. Men fainted into goblets of watered down ale. Because if women could read, they might start asking questions. And if they asked questions, they might start thinking. And if they thought, they might realise their lives were less divinely ordained and more organised oppression with a side of soup. The church and the crown both agreed. Books were dangerous, especially when opened by the wrong hands, like the small, dainty, suspiciously soft ones of a woman. Reading was reserved for monks, priests, and very serious men with very serious robes. Women? They were encouraged to read exactly one thing, the Bible, but not to interpret it, heavens no. That might lead to opinions, and medieval society could only handle one opinion at a time, and it usually belonged to a man named Geoffrey with gout. Now, if a noble woman was lucky, and I use that word loosely, she might be taught to read a little Latin, maybe French, but mostly to write letters to her husband about embroidery, piety, and how wonderfully boring her days were without him. And peasant women, oh, don't be silly. They didn't need reading. They had dirt to till, babies to birth, and husbands to obey. Books were for people who didn't need to know how to identify edible mushrooms. Still, some brave, bookish women existed. Nuns in convents secretly copying texts. Midwives memorizing herbal remedies. Queens sneaking philosophy between psalms. These women were suspicious. Because if a woman started reading too much, people whispered, was she proud? Was she unholy? Was she, gasp, a heretic? Worse still, if she began to write? That's when real panic set in. A woman with a pen? Practically a witch with a feather. They'd say she was possessed by ideas. They'd say no good wife had time for books. They'd say, what could a woman possibly have to write about? And oh, how right they were. What on earth could she write about? Besides being sold off as a child, birthing 9 children before her teeth fell out, surviving plagues, poverty and puberty simultaneously, or maybe, just maybe, how exhausting it was to live in a world where your ability to read made you a threat to civilization. Now let's learn how the church taught women to be silent, delightful, right? The church decided that silence was not just a virtue. It was the ultimate sound a woman could make. Let the woman learn in silence, without subjection, they said, and thus silence became the hottest accessory a woman could wear, right behind guilt and linen. Now, to be fair, the church loved women. They loved women who baked. They loved women who obeyed. They especially loved dead women, preferably martyrs who said nothing, did everything, and never once complained about being burned, bled, or beheaded. Saint Cecilia? Beheaded? Saint Agatha? Mutilated? Saint Joan? You know what happened to Joan? The takeaway. If a woman wanted to be admired, she had to die first, and preferably in the name of a man's religion. Now, while men became priests, bishops, even popes, women were invited to join nunneries, if they were lucky, or poor, or unwanted by their family, or widowed, or just tired of being someone's property. There, they could live quietly, pray frequently, and do all the things women were meant to do. Clean, sew, tend gardens, copy scriptures. Oh, and quietly disappear from public life. If they were smart, the church feared them. If they were loud, the church silenced them. And if they dared to preach, oh no. That was heresy with a side of gender confusion. You see, God spoke to women, never through them. And if you were married, well, the church had a message for you too. Submit to your husband as unto the Lord. Which was really just a fancy way of saying, he's Jesus now, go make him a sandwich. Men were instructed to lead their households. Women were instructed to not be difficult. Men were told to seek wisdom. Women were told to be quiet and make sure their neckline wasn't summoning demons again. And don't forget confession. A chance for women to tell a priest, usually an unmarried man with 0 lived experience, about all their sins, like having unclean thoughts, envying other women, or daring to question why God only seemed to hire men. And if she spoke out, rebel. If she challenged doctrine, heretic. If she did anything other than whisper and kneel, trial, torch, toast. But the church reminded women that obedience was their path to heaven. Speak less, serve more, suffer quietly, smile gently, die gratefully. Because what else could a woman want in life besides salvation through silence? Wombs for sale, aisle 3, next to the goats. A woman stood at the centre of a very important deal. Was it her idea? Number, was she consulted? Also number, but was she involved? Absolutely, because she was the deal. Marriage, you see, was not about love. Oh no, that nonsense wouldn't be invented for another few centuries and several paperback novels. Marriage was about land, alliances, and securing a bloodline, preferably male, obviously, because what could a daughter possibly do except cost everyone more money? A girl could be betrothed before she lost her baby teeth. She could be married off at 12, pregnant by 13, widowed by 20, and sold off again like a slightly used ox with good hips. And don't worry, the bride didn't need to understand any of the paperwork. Why would she? She was the paperwork. Her father would exchange her for a dowry, land, money, a few pigs if she was lucky. Sometimes the groom paid for her. Sometimes the bride's family paid the groom, like a thanks for taking this off our hands sort of gesture. Because nothing says, I value you, like trading your daughter for 5 acres and a mule named Gerald. Women were property, officially, legally, and joyfully. Their bodies belonged to their fathers, then their husbands, and eventually, if they made it, back to the church. Because in the end, even your corpse had to belong to someone. In fact, there was a term for a woman who tried to control her own assets: trouble. Laws were written by men, for men, to protect men's stuff, including their wives, who were expected to be fertile, faithful, and conveniently voiceless. And if a husband beat her, well, that was just him correcting his property. If he killed her, a shame, yes, but if she deserved it, many would agree it was unfortunate, but understandable. And if a woman didn't want to be traded, if she dreamed of learning, or travel, or just not marrying old Sir Toothless of Haypile Hill, oh well then, she was clearly possessed, or proud, or problematic. A holy trifecta. Sometimes widows could reclaim a sliver of freedom. Sometimes. But even then, if she had money, power, or too many opinions, men would gather and mutter, should we burn her? Because nothing says economic justice like barbecuing a literate widow. Let me tell you a little story about women friendship then. Once upon a time, 2 women dared to talk to each other. Not about a man, not about embroidery, but about thoughts and feelings and plans. It did not go well. You see, in medieval times, female friendships were like unmonitored candles. Comforting, yes, but also dangerously capable of setting the whole system on fire. Because when women gathered together without male supervision, well, who knows what they might say. Maybe they'd talk about their husbands, maybe they'd share secrets, maybe they'd realise they weren't crazy after all, and maybe, just maybe, they'd start to suspect that the world was rigged. And that kind of camaraderie. Oh no, couldn't have that. Women weren't supposed to bond. They were supposed to compete. For men, for favour, for safety. Not to conspire over tea and trauma. So the system got clever. It painted female friendships as suspicious. 2 women spending too much time together? Must be up to something. laughing privately, probably witchcraft, crying together, emotional instability, healing each other. Definitely illegal. Because nothing terrifies patriarchy like two women realising they're not the problem. And then there were the midwives, the herbalists, the women who passed on knowledge, helped others, and, gasp, trusted each other. Guess what happened to them? They were rounded up, they were tortured, they were asked over and over, who are your accomplices? Because a woman alone is manageable. But two women, with knowledge, with loyalty, with purpose, that, my dear, is dangerous. Even among queens and noblewomen, friendships were fragile. At any moment, a woman could be used as a political pawn, married off, or accused of betrayal. Intimacy was risky. Affection could be weaponized. Secrets? Best kept to yourself, until your best friend was interrogated. Sisterhood was a whispered thing, a luxury, a gamble, and when it bloomed, it was often cut short. By men, by law, by fear. But still it happened. In kitchens. In gardens. By candlelight. In the quiet moments between survival tasks, women found each other. They shared recipes and remedies, dreams and jokes, lullabies and loss. They stitched hope into hems. They brewed resistance in broth. They kept each other alive.